try and calm down, try and breathe. Have a shot, just try and breathe.
Please help me.
I know, how old's Alice?
She's only 23. I mean, knew this was coming. I got an accident, an absolute psychopath.
And finally, and most importantly, I deeply and sincerely apologize to for all anxiety, depression, stress, fear, and any other negative emotions.
Beyond the surface of harmless social media following lies terrifying real-world encounters. Some online stalkers don't stop until it's too late. From Brian Johnston's chilling obsession to Patrick Michonne's haunting cases, their courtroom reactions are just as disturbing as their crimes. Let's begin.
She put in a complaint in about her ex, and she phoned 101 at the weekend to report that he's trying to get in contact, and he says we're going to do nothing. Now this has happened.
Right, who tried to contact her at the weekend?
No, she's contacted 101 because she put in a statement about him 2 weeks ago. And
Treman Harry Dillon, a UK soldier, stalked and brutally killed his ex-girlfriend, Alice Ruggles, in 2016. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 22 years. Alice Ruggles was a 24-year-old woman with a bright future ahead of her. Originally from Market Harborough, she had moved to Gateshead, England, to build her life. Everything changed when she met Treman Harry Dillon, a soldier in the British Army. What started as a relationship quickly turned into a nightmare of control, obsession, and fear. Dillon refused to accept their breakup and began stalking Alice. He repeatedly called her, sent unsettling messages, and even showed up at her home without permission. Scared for her safety, Alice reported him to the police multiple times, hoping they would protect her. But despite her efforts, the system failed her. Dillon's behavior became more intense, and Alice knew she was in danger. He had a history of harmful behavior. His ex-girlfriend had also accused him of mistreatment. Yet, despite the restraining order against him, he continued to harass Alice. She confided in friends and family about her fears. She wanted to move on, but Dillon refused to let her go. The police had been informed, but they didn't act quickly enough. Then, on October 12, 2016, Alice's worst fear became a reality. That night, Dillon broke into Alice's home and carried out a horrific attack. He inflicted severe injuries and left her in critical condition.
Alice's phone in her hand when you left.
Yep.
Yeah. You don't want to change your mind, do you?
No.
Before we show you this?
No, it was pretty much in her hand.
When the police arrived, Dillon claimed he was innocent. He even suggested that Alice had harmed herself. However, investigators quickly uncovered the truth. Evidence showed that Dillon had been following Alice for months, and his history of harmful behavior made it clear that this was not a coincidence. During the trial, the court heard chilling details of how Dillon manipulated and harmed Alice before finally taking her life. The judge called the murder an act of utter barbarism. In 2017, Dillon was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 22 years. Alice's family felt some relief knowing that justice had been served. However, their fight for safety and justice was far from over.
I know that he's hacked into my Facebook and also my phone. He's been sending me a lot of messages even though I've asked him not to contact me.
Dillon killed Alice out of jealousy and control. He couldn't accept that she had moved on and wanted a life without him. His obsession led to the tragic murder of an innocent young woman. The most disturbing part, he showed no remorse. Even during the trial, he continued to blame Alice for what happened.
You said you loved her. You didn't love her. You thought if you can't have her, no one else can have her. How can you do that to someone you love?
Dillon is serving his sentence in the UK, but Alice's family fears he may be transferred to India, where he could be released early. Her parents, Sue Hills and Clive Ruggles, are fighting to prevent this, worried they wouldn't be informed of his release and would live in constant fear. The Ministry of Justice assures Alice's family that Dillon won't be transferred without serving an appropriate sentence, but they demand certainty. Alice trusted the system, but it failed her. Now her parents fight to keep her killer behind bars, refusing to let her be forgotten. They continue speaking out, determined to prevent others from suffering the same fate. Our next case is even more dangerous, where a man's messages to his ex-wife led to devastating consequences.
You find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Former Barrington Police Sergeant Joseph Androzzi pleaded guilty to cyberstalking and obstruction of justice, receiving a 2-year suspended sentence with probation, resigning from the police department, and mandated to attend household counseling. In Rhode Island, Joseph Androzzi, who had sworn to protect and serve, was accused of cyberstalking his ex-wife and obstructing justice. What started as a personal dispute quickly turned into a legal battle that exposed shocking details about his actions. Androsi's troubles began on August 29th when he sent multiple harassing messages to his former wife, Christine. The messages became increasingly threatening, with one even telling her to die. Christine, visibly shaken and in tears, reported the messages to the police that evening. A neighbor later testified that Christine feared for her daughter's safety because Androsi had allegedly threatened them. The case escalated when state police launched an investigation. However, what shocked investigators the most was what Androsi did next. When state police arrested Androsi and took his phone as evidence, he made a bold move. While his phone was locked away in a police evidence box, he remotely accessed it using a special app and deleted key messages.
Of the investigation, cell phones. The prosecution claims the officer sent harassing texts to his ex-wife.
The authorities quickly realized what had happened. Androsi had tampered with evidence in an active investigation, a serious crime. His actions led to additional charges of felony obstruction of justice. Despite his defense arguing that the police already had enough evidence from Christine's phone, prosecutors made one thing clear: no one is above the law.
That he had the intent, the specific intent, to in fact obstruct justice.
When prosecutors dug deep down, Androsi's motive came out. He was stemming from a mix of personal turmoil and a desire for control. Despite being divorced from Christine since 2010, their relationship remained tense. On August 29th, after she rejected any possibility of rekindling their relationship, his anger escalated to do such horrific things. However, his actions went beyond emotional outbursts. After a trial that lasted several weeks, a jury of 8 men and 4 women reached a verdict in just 2 hours. Joseph Androsi was found guilty of both cyber harassment and obstruction of justice, and condemned to 2 years suspended with probation.
A police officer and domestic cyberstalking. As part of a plea agreement, Androsi will serve 1 year of probation and must undergo counseling.
The judge ordered him to have no contact with his ex-wife and restricted his travel within the state. He was also barred from possessing firearms. Androsi, once a respected officer, now faces up to 5 years in prison for obstruction and an additional year for cyberstalking. This case proved that power and authority don't place anyone above the law. The prosecution emphasized that justice applies to all, even those in uniform. Androsi's defense portrayed him as a devoted father caught in a personal conflict, but the jury viewed his actions as a misuse of authority and an attempt to influence the legal system. With his career in ruins and freedom at risk, his downfall is a clear warning. Justice catches up to everyone. Our next case is pure evil, where a man starts online cyberstalking, but for the victim, it never stays there.
Didn't even notice he was in the class with me. It wasn't until later, when I went to college, that I got a Facebook message from someone who said they were in this class, and that would be Patrick.
It was an ordinary day in 2010, and Kristen Pratt was attending her usual classes, unaware that her life was about to change forever. She never could have imagined that a simple classmate, someone she barely knew, would soon become her worst nightmare. She met Patrick Mashoni during a high school dual enrollment program, but they barely spoke. Yet, years later, he became fixated on her, sending disturbing messages, making relentless phone calls, and even showing up where she worked and studied. What started as an uncomfortable situation quickly became something much more dangerous. One day, Mashoni messaged Pratt on Facebook. At first, the conversation was polite, but things took a dark turn.
Then after the first 3 or 4 messages, things got excessive. The messages got very weird.
After a few replies, the messages started getting weird, Pratt later recalled. Then came the phone calls, 30 to 40 calls in just one work shift. He wasn't just messaging her anymore. He was watching her, tracking her movements, and making sure she knew he was there.
That's a very unwise decision. It's up to you now.
Pratt became terrified. She feared that one day she would step outside and no one would ever see her again. When Mashoni's obsession escalated, he started posting 27 disturbing videos on YouTube. In these videos, he made violent threats towards Pratt, demanding that she meet with him. This was no longer just harassment. It was a serious criminal act. The authorities quickly got involved, and Mashoni was arrested. However, his first trial didn't go as planned. He acted out in court and was declared incompetent to stand trial. This meant he would receive mental health treatment before facing justice. After undergoing treatment, Mashoni finally accepted a plea deal. He pleaded no contest to cyberstalking Kristen Pratt. At his sentencing hearing, prosecutors played the disturbing videos he had posted online. Pratt, unable to relive the trauma, refused to watch. The prosecution demanded the maximum sentence of 15 years, arguing that Mashoni was a danger to society. What made Mashoni obsess over Pratt remains unclear. The two had barely spoken before he fixated on her. His severe mental illness played a role in his actions, but that didn't make his threats any less terrifying for Pratt. Despite the prosecution's efforts, the judge sentenced Mashoni to only 4 years in prison, giving him credit for the 2 years he had already served. This meant that he would be released in just 1 year and 10 months.
Well, I wasn't, because that would imply that someone was in danger. So that's why I would just say I was looking for someone. And other than that, I would say I was typing under the influence.
After his release, Mashoni would be placed under strict community control and then serve more than 10 years probation. The prosecution was visibly upset. They had fought for a 15-year sentence, but the law had its limits. For Kristen Pratt, the nightmare had lasted years. She had lived in constant fear, not knowing what Mashoni would do next.
It stops you in your tracks. It just kills you emotionally.
Even though he was behind bars, the emotional scars he left would last much longer. Our next case was a sparkling controversy, where an online video caught a cop.
City of Miami, sitting 20 feet, 10 feet from you as you're giving testimony of how he's basically done something wrong to you. It's nerve-wracking.
It was the Friday of January 29th, 2016, when a video went viral everywhere. Claudia Castillo, a Miami resident, noted a police officer, Daniel Fonticella, driving above the speed limit on the highway. Wanting to promote accountability, she recorded their interaction and politely addressed her concerns. She later shared the video online, where it quickly gained attention.
I was able to get up to him and honked and flashed my lights to ask him to pull over, and I don't know if he ignored me or anything, but he's been, driving recklessly. And
while many praised Castillo for holding law enforcement accountable, others felt she had crossed a line. But one person in particular took a serious issue with her actions. Miami Police Lieutenant Javier Ortiz. Ortiz disagreed with Castillo's approach to calling out Daniel Fonticella publicly. Instead of letting it go, he retaliated controversially. He shared Castillo's personal information on social media and even posted photos of her drinking beer while driving a boat. One of his captions read, "Nobody is above the law, except when I'm driving." His actions triggered an internal investigation. After 10 months of review, Internal Affairs found that Ortiz had violated department policy. However, he was only given a reprimand, something many felt was too lenient. The situation escalated even further when Miami's Civilian Investigative Panel, or CIP, a group that handles police misconduct complaints, reviewed the case. Unlike Internal Affairs, the CIP took a stronger stance. On March 21st, they found Ortiz guilty of breaking department policy.
She pulled him over.
Yeah, it's your speeding.
Okay, well, I apologize, and I'll be sure to slow down then.
As a result, Ortiz was stripped of his gun, removed from active duty, and reassigned to desk work. He was also placed under administrative review, pending a court hearing for a restraining order signed by a judge.
Castillo said a visibly angry Ortiz tried to follow her to the parking lot. She hasn't discussed it on camera, but talked to us on the phone.
Ortiz's actions stemmed from loyalty to his fellow officer and frustration over Castillo's criticism. He saw it as unfair, but others felt he had overstepped his authority. At the CIP hearing, Castillo testified, later admitting she feared for her safety. Despite the backlash, Ortiz's punishment stood, a reminder that even those in power must follow the rules. This case sparked a heated debate among people. No matter where people stood, one thing was clear: social media and public scrutiny reshaped law enforcement accountability. The case warned that actions by civilians or officers have lasting consequences. Our next case shows the stalking defendant that justice isn't just about punishment, it's about safety.
Next, I want to sincerely apologize to my family. My actions have caused my family much trouble.
Former Hillcrest High School teacher Brian Johnston, 50, pleaded guilty to felony stalking. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with 1.5 years fixed and 3.5 years indeterminate. Teachers are meant to inspire and guide students towards success, But for Brian Johnston, a former Hillcrest High School teacher and coach, his influence took a dark turn. What started as a relationship with a former student soon spiraled into an obsessive and terrifying stalking case that left the victim fearing for her life. Johnston, now 51, was once a respected educator. However, years after one of his former students graduated, they began a relationship. When it ended, Johnston refused to accept it. Instead of moving on, he became obsessed with her. His troubling behavior escalated. He involved current and former students in keeping tabs on her, even asking them to take note of cars in her driveway. At one point, he even tried to persuade someone to take her pet away. Johnston's fixation grew so extreme that he even wrote a bizarre letter, posing as a woman, claiming that he had been framed. He signed it, "The Puppet Master," trying to manipulate the victim into doubting reality. By June 2018, his disturbing behavior had escalated so much that the victim sought legal protection. She obtained a civil protection order, and Johnston had been arrested. He continued to show up at places the victim visited, including a coffee shop she frequented, making it clear that he had no intention of stopping. His repeated disregard for the law put him on law enforcement's radar. Investigators discovered that Johnston had hidden a recording device in the victim's bedroom, a clear invasion of privacy and a major piece of evidence in the case. And witnesses confirmed seeing him near her residence and workplace. In September 2018, Johnston was arrested again after months of unwanted attention and intrusive behavior. The case surprised the community as the extent of his attempts to influence and monitor the victim became clear. When the case went to the courtroom and the trial started, Bonneville County Assistant Chief Deputy Prosecutor Tanner Crowther emphasized that this was no ordinary case of stalking. It involved months of planning, deception, and manipulation. Even after his arrest, Johnston's obsession did not seem to fade. In February 2019, Johnston pleaded guilty to first-degree stalking. Instead of a standard prison sentence, he was placed in a rider program, a rehabilitation initiative designed to help offenders reform their behavior.
The victim said she could not trust others because Johnston had enlisted her friends and strangers to help him stalk her. This day has been a long time coming, and I can't wait for it to be over.
After completing the program, his defense attorney claimed Johnston had been an exceptional participant. He had allegedly helped other inmates and never needed discipline. This led the court to consider placing him on probation instead of keeping him in prison. What drove Johnston to such extreme behavior? His actions revealed a need for control. When the relationship ended, he turned to intimidation, surveillance, and manipulation. His obsession was clear in involving others, even students, to spy. The fabricated letter, "The Puppet Master," further exposed his manipulative nature. In court, he apologized, saying, "I apologize to the community for my actions, which may have caused any difficult emotions."
Next, I want to sincerely apologize to the community for my actions, which may have caused any difficult emotions.
Despite the victim's plea to keep Johnston behind bars, District Judge Joel Tingey ruled that his completion of the rider program was enough to place him on 4 years of probation. However, a no-contact order remains in place, and if Johnston attempts to reach the victim again, he could face an 18-month to 5-year prison sentence.
The sentence on this will be 5 years, 1.5 fixed, 3.5 indeterminate.
As soon as the verdict was read, the defendant started sobbing.
A case of a career criminal. This is somebody that was actually very productive in the community.
This case is a reminder that stalking is not just about unwanted attention. It's about control, fear, and manipulation. Johnston's actions went far beyond typical harassment. They were calculated and relentless. While he claims to have changed, his past behavior raises a troubling question. Can someone who went to such extreme lengths to control another person ever truly move on? Up next is David Heiss, whose dangerous obsession led to a brutal and calculated crime.
Continue to remove potential evidence from the flat above a pub where Matthew Pike was stabbed to death. But attention was also focused on the complex world of computer games and online forums.
Matthew Pike and his girlfriend Joanna Whitten lived a quiet life in Nottingham, England. They shared an apartment above the Orange Tree pub and spent their free time running an online gaming forum. But what they didn't know was that one of their forum members, David Heiss, was watching, obsessing, waiting for his moment to step into their real world. Heiss, a 21-year-old from Germany, wasn't just a casual player on their online gaming community. He had developed a twisted fixation on Joanna, one that spiraled into full-blown stalking. And when reality didn't match his fantasy, he took a flight to England and knocked on their door. David Heiss had been messaging Joanna constantly. Compliments turned into possessive rants, friendly conversations into desperate pleas for attention. But no matter how many times Joanna rejected him, Heiss refused to let go. Matthew, growing frustrated with Heiss's unwanted attention, stepped in. He warned him to back off, blocked him from the forum, and made it clear Joanna wanted nothing to do with him. That should have been the end of it, but instead, it became the beginning of something far worse. On the 21st of June, 2008, Heiss boarded a plane to the UK. No warning, no messages, just a single-minded obsession that had reached a deadly peak. Hours later, he was outside Matthew's apartment. Heiss had no invitation. He had memorized the address from an online forum post. What happened next was brutal and fast. As soon as Matthew opened the door, Heiss attacked. With a knife he had hidden in his bag, he stabbed Matthew 86 times. A rage-fueled, frenzied attack, all because Matthew stood between him and his obsession.
Police continued to remove potential evidence from the flat above a pub where Matthew Pike was stabbed to death.
And then, Heiss simply left. He took a train back to the airport, flew home to Germany, and acted as if nothing had happened.
A few days after she discovered his body, a German computer game enthusiast, calling himself David Heiss, left a message on her Facebook page. The message said, "You must be suffering unbelievable pain. I'm sorry for causing so much trouble lately."
But Heiss left behind a crucial piece of evidence, a bloody fingerprint on Matthew's computer. Police quickly connected the dots. Joanna, devastated and terrified, told investigators about the months of stalking, the online harassment, the escalating obsession. And when authorities checked Heiss's online activity, they found something even more chilling. Just one day after the murder, Heiss logged onto Matthew's forum, as if nothing had happened.
This led Nottinghamshire police to Germany, and legal efforts are underway to bring their suspect back to Britain.
Authorities moved fast. Germany arrested Heiss, and despite initial legal battles, he was extradited to the UK for trial. He showed zero remorse in court, insisting that it was never about Joanna, but rather a personal dispute with Matthew.
Heiss admitted that he'd been to Nottingham and he'd stabbed Matthew Pike.
But he claimed he only did so in self-defence. David Heiss was confessing to manslaughter, not premeditated murder.
At sentencing, the judge called Heiss a cold, calculating killer, describing his crime as premeditated and obsessive. Joanna sat in the courtroom, shaking as she listened, knowing how close she had come to being his target.
On the 11th of May 2009, the jury found David Heiss guilty of the murder of Matthew Pike at Nottingham Crown Court. He was sentenced to life imprisonment.
Matthew's parents, devastated, called Heiss a coward who destroyed their family over a delusion.
Christmas was horrible. We didn't really want to celebrate it. We didn't want to do anything, but we've got grandchildren and we've still got Adam to consider. So we did the best we could and we got through it.
David Heiss was sentenced to life in prison, but for Matthew's loved ones, no sentence could undo what was stolen. A stalker traveling across borders to murder his victim in cold blood is terrifying. But what happens when the stalker is already close? Michael Lane's obsession turned into a brutal act of revenge on someone who once trusted him.
Just don't do it again. And if you come near the house again,
I won't come near the house again. I won't contact you again. Okay?
I think that's best.
A judge today sentenced Michael Lane, the killer of Shana Grice, who was 19 years old and from Portslade, to a life in prison for at least 25 years before he can be considered for parole.
At first glance, Michael Lane seemed like an ordinary guy, a quiet, reserved man living in Brighton, England. But beneath the surface, he was obsessively fixated on his ex-girlfriend, Shana Grice. Shana was only 19 when she became the target of Lane's disturbing obsession. She had moved on, started dating someone new, but Lane refused to let go. His behavior escalated from following her to work to breaking into her home, stealing belongings, and even tampering with her car.
Lane had crept into her home to watch her sleep after stealing her house key.
She reported Lane to police for harassment 5 times over 6 months.
She reported him to police 5 separate times. Instead of protecting her, they fined her for wasting police time. Despite Lane's escalating behavior, authorities dismissed her fears. When she found him hiding outside her house in the middle of the night, officers still did nothing. Even after he attacked her, they told her it was just a relationship dispute.
Lane had become obsessed with Shana and could not accept that she did not want to be with him. This verdict will not bring Shana back.
Then, on August 25, 2016, Lane made his final move. That morning, he waited outside her house, watching. As soon as her parents left for work, he broke in.
At 7:29 a.m., he was captured on CCTV walking in the direction of Shana's house, wearing a light-coloured top, knee-length dark shorts, white Lonsdale trainers, and carrying a blue baseball cap.
Lane attacked Shana in her bedroom, covering her mouth to muffle her screams. He then inflicted a fatal injury to her neck before setting her bedroom on fire to destroy evidence. By the time firefighters arrived, it was too late. Lane had already fled, but police quickly noticed something suspicious. He had been caught on CCTV buying a canister of petrol just hours before the fire.
He was seen on CCTV that afternoon, filling up a red petrol can at West Hove Sainsbury's petrol station. He also put matches and a change of clothes into his car.
And when they checked his phone, they found dozens of disturbing messages tracking her movements and obsessing over her daily routine. Michael Lane was arrested the same day. In court, he showed no emotion, even as the prosecution laid out the brutal details of what he had done.
Her bedroom door was half open again, and she was on the floor.
Tell me about your thought process then, about what made you think, right, rather than just calling the police and the ambulance, I'm going to just leave.
After only 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years. Shauna's family was devastated, not just by her loss, but by the sheer negligence of the police. Had they taken her report seriously, she might still be alive.
Shana's family released a statement in which they said, "We're very relieved that the man who killed our precious Shana, our only child, will serve a long and deserved prison sentence. Michael Lane is a dangerous and obsessive man."
In the years following, an investigation found multiple failures in how police handled her case. Several officers were disciplined, and new laws were proposed to improve how authorities respond to stalking victims. But for Shauna's loved ones, it was too little, too late.
And inadequate is exactly the kind of care Shana Grice received. A young woman who went to police for protection, who was murdered by the very person she'd asked them to protect her from.
Shana Grice's case showed how devastating it can be when warning signs are ignored. But the next case takes stalking to another level, one where obsession turned into a deadly ambush.
The latest on the murder of that 21-year-old University of Utah student who was killed by her ex-boyfriend moments after speaking with her mother on the phone. School police are facing questions about how they handled multiple reports.
On a crisp October night in 2018, the University of Utah campus was bustling with students heading to dorms, libraries, and late-night study sessions. But for Lauren McCluskey, a 21-year-old track star, the night would take a deadly turn. A relationship she once thought was safe had spiraled into a nightmare, one that would end in tragedy.
At a parole hearing, he once said this:
"Every woman I've met or come across, I used my manipulation tactics to get what I wanted."
Lauren had met Melvin Rowland, a seemingly charming older man, at a local bar. What she didn't know was that Rowland was living a lie, using a fake identity to hide his disturbing criminal past. He had spent years in prison for disgusting offenses, but that wasn't the story he told Lauren.
McCluskey dated Rowland for a month but broke it off October 9th after discovering he'd lied about his name and age and was a registered sex offender.
As their relationship progressed, the truth slowly unraveled. Lauren discovered his real name and his status as a convicted felon. Horrified, she ended things immediately, but Rowland wasn't willing to let go.
"I think they're trying to lure me somewhere. Do you know when an arrest would be made?"
Talking with police over 20 times, crying for help with her ex-boyfriend, a seasoned manipulator who had his sights set on Lauren.
His obsession took a dark turn. Constant calls, stalking her around campus, and even hacking into her online accounts. Lauren reported his behavior to campus security and local police, but the warnings weren't taken seriously. Even when she told authorities that she was being followed, They brushed it off. And then, on October 22, 2018, Roland made his move. That evening, Lauren was walking back to her dorm, talking to her mother on the phone. The conversation was normal until she suddenly screamed.
Shell casing and possible shots fired.
Lauren McCluskey was on the phone with her mom Monday night, headed back to her dorm at the University of Utah. Her mother says, "Suddenly I heard her yell, 'No, no, no.'"
Roland had ambushed her in a dark parking lot, dragged her into a car, and shot her multiple times. Lauren's mother, still on the call, heard her daughter's final moments. As police swarmed the area, Roland was already gone. He had planned his escape, fleeing campus, jumping between buildings, and trying to stay ahead of law enforcement. But the chase wouldn't last long.
Police in Salt Lake City, Utah say the man accused of shooting and killing a student at the University of Utah last night has taken his Investigators say 37-year-old Melvin Rowland's body was found at a church in the city's downtown area.
Hours later, he was spotted near a local church. Before police could take him into custody, Roland was found deceased at the scene. Lauren never got the protection she needed. Despite repeated cries for help, she was failed at every level. University officials, law enforcement, and campus security all had opportunities to stop Roland, but no one took action until it was too late.
Help speed things up. Do you know when an arrest would be made?
You can talk to an officer if you want. I can arrange that if you want that.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good.
That arrest was never made.
Her murder sparked nationwide outrage. How did a convicted felon slip through the cracks? Why weren't the warnings taken seriously? Investigations into the handling of Lauren's case exposed serious flaws in how stalking and harassment cases were treated. The university was held accountable, facing lawsuits and policy changes to prevent another tragedy like Lauren's.
One thing she did tell me, feels like I'm bothering them because she was calling so much. And then I remember telling her, it's their job to listen to you, if you're complaining.
But they weren't listening.
No, they weren't.
Lauren's parents turned their grief into action. They fought for stricter stalking laws, campus safety reforms, and the Lauren McCluskey Foundation, aimed at protecting young women from violent relationships. Her mother, Jill McCluskey, became a fierce advocate, ensuring that Lauren's name would never be forgotten.
Lauren McCluskey loved the track. Today, that's the gathering place for those who loved her.
It's really hard to come to peace with something that was really preventable.
But at the heart of it all remains a chilling reality. Lauren did everything right. She reported the danger, she asked for help, and still, she was ignored. Lauren McCluskey's case revealed the danger of ignoring clear warning signs, but the next case is just as disturbing. Brandon Clark, a man whose obsession turned deadly, leading to a shocking crime that played out in real time.
It is alleged that on the date of July 14th of 2019, while you were here in the city of Utica in the county of Oneida, with intent to cause the death of Bianca Devens, you did cause the death.
As you've probably heard, he videotaped the homicide. All I can say is I'm very grateful that 12 jurors from our community don't have to see what Brandon did to Bianca.
Social media connects people across the world, but for Bianca Devens, an online friendship turned into a deadly obsession. At just 17, Bianca had built a following online, sharing her love of art, music, and fashion. But behind the likes and comments, one admirer wanted more than just friendship. And when he didn't get what he wanted, things took a horrific turn.
A 17-year-old young woman who was popular on social media was murdered in Utica, New York back in 2019. Her killer posted the images of her body online and they soon went viral.
Bianca had met Brandon Clark, a 21-year-old from New York, through Instagram. They bonded over similar interests, but Bianca never saw their connection as romantic. To her, Brandon was a friend. To him, she was his entire world. And that world was about to crumble.
But it all became very real when a 911 call came in from Brandon Clark.
We have him on the line now.
A young man that Bianca had been out with that night.
My name is Brandon. The victim is Bianca Michelle Devens.
Brandon became increasingly possessive, monitoring her interactions and growing jealous when she spoke to other men. His frustration boiled over on July 14, 2019, after they attended a concert together. That night, Bianca was seen talking to another guy, a simple conversation that sent Brandon into a jealous rage. Instead of driving Bianca home, he took her to a secluded area where his obsession turned into pure violence.
Hi. What are you doing, man?
Brandon's armed with a knife.
After a brief struggle, police disarmed Clark and placed him under arrest. Investigators soon discovered Bianca's body under a tarp.
So you better send somebody to the mom's house.
In the early hours of the morning, Brandon attacked Bianca in his car, ending her life in a brutal and calculated way. But he didn't stop there. He took photos of what he had done and posted them online.
Authorities dropped a charge of promoting prison contraband. Clark allegedly created a shank from a toothbrush. His sentencing is set for April 6th.
Within minutes, the images spread across social media, horrifying friends, family, and complete strangers. Some even thought it was a sick joke, until police confirmed the unthinkable. Brandon then posted a farewell message expressing his distress and intentions. By the time authorities tracked him down, he was lying on the ground next to Bianca's body, holding a knife in his hand. But his plan didn't go as expected. Brandon survived his injuries and was taken into custody. What followed was a high-profile trial that exposed the dangers of toxic online obsessions.
The motive for the killing, police say, Clark became jealous after Devins kissed someone else at that concert.
He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. But Bianca's family wasn't just seeking justice. They wanted change.
Well, under the plea deal, Clark will receive a maximum sentence of 25 years to life in prison. Authorities dropped a charge of promoting prison contraband. Clark allegedly created a shank from a toothbrush.
The Bianca Devins Foundation was created to educate young people on the dangers of online predators and digital violence, ensuring that Bianca's story wasn't just another tragedy. It was a warning.
It's also something Bianca's family wanted him to do.
One statement to me that stood out was that he said Bianca did not deserve this. And that's right. She did nothing to deserve this.
The internet had once been Bianca's creative outlet, but in the end, it became the tool her killer used to exploit her death. Her family, devastated yet determined, has since pushed for stronger online safety measures and fought back against platforms that allowed the disturbing images to spread. But perhaps the most chilling part of this case, Bianca trusted the wrong person, and she paid the ultimate price. Bianca Devins' case revealed the dark side of online obsession, but the next case is just as unsettling. Justin Thurber, a man whose twisted fixation led to an unspeakable crime that shook an entire community.
A Kansas inmate sentenced to death now found to not have an intellectual disability. That comes from a ruling by a Cali County judge, and that decision now sends the case back to the Kansas Supreme Court. Is convicted in the brutal kidnapping and murder of Jody Sanderholm. In 2018, the state's highest court postponed the decision on executing Thurber.
For Jody Sanderholm, January 5, 2007 was supposed to be just another day. The 19-year-old college student was heading to her dance team practice, something she had done countless times before. But this time, she never made it home.
Cindy and Jody's dad Brian contacted her friends, but no one had seen her since she left the dance practice. They also learned that Jody hadn't turned up for a meeting she had at noon.
As hours passed, her family grew worried. Jody was responsible, reliable, and never missed a commitment. The more they searched, the clearer it became. Something was very, very wrong.
Officers in the Arkansas City Police Department have been investigating for days.
Good evening, I'm Michael Schwenke. Still no new leads in the disappearance of 19-year-old Cali County college student, but that does not mean hope is fading.
What no one knew at the time was that Jody had been secretly followed for weeks. A shadow lurking in the background, watching, waiting, and planning his next move. The man behind that shadow? Justin Thurber.
The police also spoke to Jody's dance friends. They asked if they had noticed anyone suspicious trying to hang out Jody or the college. They did say there was a man named Justin Thurber who would watch them in the parking lot.
A small-town predator with a history of stalking and harassing women. He had been seen watching Jody from a distance, lurking near her dance studio, and following her around town. But no one thought he would actually do something, until it was too late. On that January day, Justin saw his chance.
On January 5th, Jody's black Stratus could be seen leaving the school, followed by a blue Cadillac. The police also saw that Justin had visited the college several days in a row, the days leading up to January 5th.
Jody was last seen leaving her practice, walking to her car. That was when Thurber made his move. She never made it home. As her friends and family frantically searched, authorities turned their focus on one person, the man who had been fixated on her for weeks. It wasn't long before they uncovered the disturbing truth.
Beaten and strangled to death. Justin Thurber then drove her car about 10 miles and pushed it off of a boat ramp and sunk it to the bottom of the Cali State Fishing Lake.
3 days later, investigators found Jody's abandoned car near a lake. Then, in a remote wooded area, they discovered her body, hidden, discarded, and left to the elements. The crime was brutal, and the evidence pointed to one suspect. Thurber was arrested, and what followed was a chilling trial that revealed the depths of his obsession.
Jody did nothing to deserve what she did. She did not even know who Justin Thurber was. We found out at the trial that he had been stalking both her and myself for, at that point, 10 years.
Prosecutors laid out the facts. He had been following her, planning this, and waiting for the perfect moment. But perhaps the most unsettling part, Jody had no idea just how dangerous he truly was.
The DNA of Justin Thurber was found in my sister's vehicle. He 100% did this. A jury sat there for 2 weeks and listened to the evidence, and they took it very seriously.
In 2009, Justin Thurber was convicted and sentenced to death, a rare punishment in the state of Kansas.
The Sanderholms wanted Justin to get the death penalty. Over 60 witnesses testified about the mountain of evidence against Justin. The trial lasted 7 days, but the jury only deliberated for 3.5 hours. Justin Thurber was found guilty on all charges and was sentenced to death in March 2009.
But even after the verdict, Jody's family faced a painful legal battle. Due to mental competency appeals, Thurber's execution has been delayed indefinitely, meaning he remains on death row to this day. For Jody's loved ones, justice feels unfinished, but they continue to fight to keep his sentence in place. Jody Sanderholm had a bright future ahead of her, until she crossed paths with someone who refused to take no for an answer. Her case became a warning about the dangers of ignoring stalking behavior, leading to stronger protections for victims. But the most haunting fact, she never even knew how much danger she was really in. Up next is Joshua Johnson, whose actions turned a routine disagreement into a horrifying act.
Arrest papers say his 17-year-old co-worker, Riley Whitelaw, rejected unwanted advances by him at work. She was found dead one night in the break room.
A typical day at the Colorado Springs Walgreens turned into a nightmare in June 2022, shattering the quiet routine of the store. Riley Whitelaw, a bright and hardworking 17-year-old employee, never imagined her job would place her in mortal danger. Her co-worker, Joshua Johnson, had developed a fixation on her, a dangerous obsession that escalated into a horrifying act of violence.
I bet you like to be choked. There were other witnesses called too. One of them, the assistant manager at that Walgreens. 2 others were Riley's friends. All 3 said they heard stories about Johnson acting weird towards Riley.
Joshua's disturbing behavior began long before the fatal day. He made his infatuation with Riley no secret, despite her repeated rejections. Riley even reported his actions to her managers, mentioning that his advances made her deeply uncomfortable. Management, however, failed to act decisively. The tension reached its breaking point when Riley requested additional shifts, unaware that it would bring her into closer contact with Johnson. On June 11, 2022, the store became the scene of an unspeakable crime. As Riley worked in the employee break room that afternoon, Joshua Johnson confronted her. Armed with a deadly determination, fueled by rejection, he attacked her in a vicious act of brutality. Surveillance footage revealed Johnson lingering near the area before the crime, his intentions clear in hindsight. When Riley didn't return to her duties, coworkers became concerned. Upon entering the break room, they discovered a scene of horror, Riley's lifeless body surrounded by signs of a violent struggle. Johnson, meanwhile, fled the store, leaving behind damning evidence, including his own DNA. Authorities quickly launched a manhunt, eventually apprehending Johnson miles away. In custody, his chilling lack of remorse only deepened the tragedy of Riley's loss.
He's preparing to spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole.
In October 2023, Joshua Johnson faced a courtroom packed with Riley's grieving family and friends. He showed no emotion as the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, sentencing him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was heavy with emotion as Riley's family addressed Johnson directly, expressing their heartbreak and fury. Riley's mother spoke with raw pain, calling Johnson a monster and hoping he would suffer every day in prison. The devastation extended beyond the family, with the community mourning the loss of a young life taken far too soon. Riley's murder served as a grim reminder of the dangers of unchecked obsession and the devastating consequences of failing to act on warning signs.
Anything Riley ever has taken on, she's always got both feet in. Riley was a kind, loving, empathetic human being.
Up next is the case of Jesse Matthew, a man whose trusted exterior concealed a sinister predator.
The 32-year-old has already been charged with the abduction of Hannah Graham, a second-year UVA student who vanished back on September 13th. Police say she was last seen with Matthew
in the picturesque college town of Charlottesville, Virginia. Jesse Matthew hid behind a charming facade. To the public, he seemed like an ordinary man. But lurking beneath was a predatory killer whose crimes left families shattered and communities horrified. His name became infamous after two young women, Hannah Graham and Morgan Harrington, vanished under eerily similar circumstances.
Police surveillance video from downtown Charlottesville. Hannah is seen walking by a pub, a gas station, and a jewelry store, running at times.
It began with the disappearance of 18-year-old Hannah Graham in September 2014. The University of Virginia student was last seen on surveillance footage, walking alone late at night. Witnesses described her speaking to a man matching Matthew's description. Days later, his car was found abandoned, but Hannah remained missing. This wasn't Matthew's first brush with suspicion. In 2009, Morgan Harrington, a Virginia Tech student, disappeared after attending a Metallica concert. Her body was discovered months later on a remote farm. Despite DNA evidence linking Matthew to Morgan's murder, it wasn't until Hannah's case that police were able to pin him down.
This evening, authorities now revealing forensic evidence might link this case to another mystery.
In 2009, Harrington was visiting the University of Virginia for a Metallica concert when she went missing.
As investigators dug deeper, a chilling pattern emerged. Jesse Matthew was a calculated predator who used his charm to lure his victims before carrying out unspeakable acts. The two cases sparked outrage and fear, with many wondering how such a dangerous individual had managed to evade justice for so long.
Now, her disappearance triggered a massive search, and Matthew was later captured near Galveston, Texas. Graham's remains were found within a rural part of Albemarle County back in October of last year.
The hunt for Matthew became a national story. Police eventually tracked him to a beach in Texas, where he was arrested in September 2014. His trial revealed shocking details of his brutality. He had kidnapped and murdered both Hannah and Morgan, leaving a trail of evidence that ultimately sealed his fate. In a dramatic plea deal to avoid the death penalty, Matthew admitted to both murders, receiving 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. While the plea deal provided some closure, it left many feeling that Matthew got off too lightly. The courtroom was tense as the families of Hannah and Morgan delivered emotional impact statements. They described the immeasurable pain of losing their daughters to such senseless violence.
Morgan Harrington's mother told us she was going to be there every day that he was in court because she wanted to look at him. You know, you're not going to be able to hurt anybody else again.
Matthew sat expressionless, his cold demeanor a stark contrast to the anguish pouring from the victim's loved ones. Forensic evidence presented during the trial painted him as a remorseless killer, one whose actions had devastated not just the families, but entire communities.
His evil deprived the world of a great talent, but Hannah's enduring gift to us all is that she enabled this wicked man to be apprehended and convicted. She did change the world, but at a terrible price.
Hannah's father, John Graham, addressed the court with words that resonated deeply. "You took our daughter, our light, our joy. You didn't just murder her, you murdered a part of all of us." The family's raw pain and the judge's harsh sentencing were met with both relief and sorrow.
The finality and accountability that has been achieved today will allow our family to redirect energy into healing and recovery.
Matthew's lack of remorse left a lasting impression, turning him into a symbol of the horrors of predatory violence. His crimes serve as a haunting reminder that evil can often hide in plain sight. Next, we uncover the disturbing case of Daniel Messel, whose predatory behavior turned a college town's vibrant nightlife into a hunting ground.
Daniel Messel has a long history of violence and alcohol problems dating back nearly 30 years, including this case from 1987.
It started with what should have been a joyous night for 22-year-old Hannah Wilson, a senior at Indiana University. It was spring 2015, and Hannah had just celebrated the end of classes with friends. But that joy turned into unspeakable horror when she disappeared after leaving a bar. Hours later, her body was found in a desolate field in Brown County, Indiana. The killer, a man whose stalking tendencies had escalated into something far more sinister, Daniel Messel. Messel, a 49-year-old with a history of violence, was no stranger to law enforcement. Investigators soon discovered a chilling connection between him and Hannah. At the crime scene, Messel's phone was found near her body, tying him directly to the murder. But this wasn't an isolated crime. Authorities uncovered a disturbing pattern. Messel had a history of preying on vulnerable women, lurking in shadows, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. For Hannah, that moment came as she tried to make her way home, unknowingly crossing paths with a predator. Messel attacked her with a blunt object, causing severe trauma that ended her life. The brutality of the act shocked even seasoned detectives, but as the investigation unraveled, it became clear that this wasn't his first violent crime.
Convicted of killing IU student Hannah Wilson has begun serving 80 years in prison.
During the trial, Messel's previous behavior came into sharp focus. Witnesses revealed a man who had a penchant for stalking and harassing women, with one survivor recounting a harrowing escape years earlier. Prosecutors painted a vivid picture of a man who thrived on power and control, targeting young women like Hannah as part of his twisted routine. The courtroom was tense as graphic evidence was presented. Photos of the crime scene, paired with testimony about Hannah's final moments, left jurors visibly shaken. Messel sat stoically, his lack of remorse further enraging those in attendance. In 2016, Daniel Messel was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 80 years in prison, ensuring he would never harm another person. For Hannah's family, the sentencing was a bittersweet moment. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring back the bright, ambitious young woman they'd lost.
Addressing him was the hardest thing that any mother should ever have done.
Further investigations linked Messel to other unsolved crimes, with authorities suspecting him in the disappearance of Lauren Spearer, another Indiana University student who vanished in 2011. Though never formally charged in that case, Messel's predatory behavior raised questions about how many more victims he may have claimed. The courtroom during Messel's sentencing was filled with raw emotion. Hannah's mother spoke directly to the man who took her daughter's life, her words echoing in the heavy silence. "You didn't just take Hannah, you took a part of all of us." Messel, however, showed no emotion, maintaining the same detached demeanor he had displayed throughout the trial. His refusal to acknowledge the pain he caused only deepened the community's outrage. Now let's take a flight over to London, where Delroy Easton Grant preyed on the city's most vulnerable, leaving behind a trail of fear and devastation that spanned decades.
At his home nearby, forensic investigators were still looking for evidence against him. His alleged crimes go back 17 years.
For nearly 2 decades, Delroy Easton Grant, infamously known as the Night Stalker, prowled the quiet suburbs of South London. His targets weren't what most people would expect: elderly, vulnerable individuals who lived alone. The calculated way he terrorized his victims turned neighborhoods into places of fear, leaving entire communities on edge. Grant's reign of terror began in the early 1990s. Under the cover of darkness, he would break into the homes of elderly victims, ranging in age from their 60s to their 90s. What made his crimes particularly chilling was the twisted pleasure he derived from prolonging their torment. His method was as strategic as it was horrifying. After disabling phone lines and cutting off power, he would creep into bedrooms, where he attacked his victims and ransacked their homes. The psychological scars he left were devastating, with many victims too terrified to remain in their homes after the attacks. Despite numerous reports and investigations, police struggled to catch him. The meticulous nature of his crimes and a series of investigative missteps allowed him to evade capture for years. His double life as a seemingly devoted father and husband only deepened the sense of betrayal when his true identity was revealed. The turning point came in 2009, when advances in forensic technology linked Grant to DNA evidence found at multiple crime scenes. Police conducted an undercover operation, leading to his arrest as he prowled the streets, searching for his next victim.
The Metropolitan Police had to apologise for missing an opportunity to catch him in 1999 when his car was spotted at the scene of a burglary.
During his trial in 2011, prosecutors detailed the over 100 attacks he committed, labeling him one of the most prolific sex offenders in British history. The courtroom heard harrowing accounts from survivors, painting a chilling picture of a man who thrived on fear and power. Grant maintained his innocence throughout the trial, but the evidence was irrefutable. He was convicted of 29 charges, including assault and burglary, though investigators believe the true number of his crimes was much higher. The judge handed him 4 life sentences, ensuring he would never again harm another victim. Grant's complete lack of remorse during sentencing was a chilling reminder of his cold and calculating nature. His expression remained blank, even as horrifying actions were recounted in detail. Now let's shift focus to Washington, D.C., where John Hinckley Jr.'s twisted obsession turned into an assassination attempt that shook the nation to its core.
In 1981, a bullet narrowly missed the heart of a sitting president. It was the man who pulled the trigger. Here's how history remembers John Hinckley Jr., the obsessive man who nearly killed Ronald Reagan.
On March 30th, 1981, the tranquility of Washington, D.C. was shattered by an attempted assassination that nearly claimed the life of President Ronald Reagan. John Hinckley Jr. didn't act out of political motivations, but from a chilling obsession with actress Jodie Foster. His crime wasn't just about a single act of violence. It was the culmination of years of delusion and fixation, turning an innocent Hollywood starlet into the unwitting focus of a deadly plan.
Yesterday it emerged that Hinckley had written a lot of letters to the 19-year-old actress who starred in the movie Taxi Driver.
Hinckley's downward spiral began long before that fateful day. As a young man, he struggled with deep feelings of inadequacy and isolation, withdrawing from his family and peers. While attending a screening of Taxi Driver, he became captivated by Jodie Foster, who played a young woman caught in a cycle of harm. What started as admiration quickly turned into an obsession as he followed her career and life with fanatical determination.
Who is this? Who is this? John. Who?
When Foster enrolled at Yale University in 1980, Hinckley moved to New Haven, Connecticut to stalk her. He sent her disturbing letters, recorded rambling audio messages, and even attempted to call her directly. But his efforts to win her attention failed, pushing him to devise a shocking plan to make her notice him. Hinckley's plan involved assassinating the most powerful figure in the world, the President of the United States. In his twisted mind, killing President Reagan would earn him the recognition he craved from Foster. On March 30th, 1981, armed with a .22 caliber revolver, Hinckley blended into the crowd outside the Washington Hilton Hotel, where Reagan was delivering a speech. As the president exited the building, Hinckley opened fire, striking 4 people, including Reagan.
First shot hits Jim Brady, the press secretary, in the head. He falls to the ground.
Reagan was critically wounded by a bullet that ricocheted off the limousine and lodged near his heart. White House Press Secretary James Brady, Secret Service agent Timothy McCarthy, and a police officer were also gravely injured. The scene was chaotic as agents rushed to subdue Hinckley while ensuring Reagan's safety. Hinckley was immediately arrested, and the nation held its breath as Reagan fought for his life in the hospital. Remarkably, the president survived, but the incident left permanent scars, both physical and emotional, on all involved.
The jury had ruled Hinckley, then 25, not guilty by reason of insanity, but ordered him confined to a mental hospital for life.
In court, Hinckley's defense focused on his mental instability. Psychiatrists testified that he suffered from severe depression and psychosis, leading to his obsession with Foster and his belief that violence would win her affection. In a controversial verdict, Hinckley was found not guilty by reason of insanity and committed to a mental institution rather than prison. Hinckley spent over 3 decades at St. Elizabeth's Hospital undergoing treatment. Despite his eventual release under strict conditions in 2016, many questioned whether justice had been served, especially given the trauma inflicted on the victims and the nation. The courtroom reaction to Hinckley's verdict was a mix of outrage and disbelief. Survivors, like James Brady, who was left permanently disabled, became powerful advocates for gun control, spurred by the tragedy. Reagan's remarkable resilience in recovering and resuming his duties became a symbol of strength for the American people. Jodie Foster, the unwitting catalyst of Hinckley's crime, was deeply shaken. The actress rarely speaks about the ordeal, but it's clear the stalking left a lasting impact on her life. For millions, Hinckley's obsession with Foster was a chilling reminder of how delusion and fixation can escalate into national tragedy. Next, we turn to the case of Jamir Miller, where a moment of anger led to irreversible tragedy, leaving lives shattered and questions unanswered.
The big story tonight at 5, breaking news in Detroit. Detroit police say a man is in custody at this hour in connection to the kidnapping and murder of Detroit Medical Center nurse Patrice Wilson, who was killed Saturday.
Look at that person lingering around the outside. Hat on, mask over his face, and a long blonde wig. Prosecutors and police say that is 36-year-old Jamir Miller.
On a quiet May morning in Detroit, Michigan, nurse Patrice Wilson finished her overnight shift at a local hospital. Unbeknownst to her, lurking in the shadows was Jamir Miller, her ex-boyfriend turned stalker. As she stepped into her car, Miller ambushed her, forcing his way into the vehicle at gunpoint. This kidnapping would end in a chilling crime that shook the city to its core.
And it was a man that allegedly would not leave her alone, would not respond to her wishes to leave her alone.
Miller's obsession with Patrice began after their relationship ended. Unable to accept her moving on, he began a campaign of harassment, one that escalated dangerously over time. Authorities later revealed that Miller had a history of violence, including connections to the 2011 disappearance of another girlfriend. Despite his alarming behavior, no one could have predicted the horrifying events that unfolded.
Out his alleged plan to abduct his ex-girlfriend nurse, Patrice Wilson. Miller knows where Wilson works. He knows when she gets off from work.
That fateful morning, Miller abducted Patrice from the hospital parking lot. Surveillance footage captured the terrifying moment, showing her desperate struggle to break free. Tragically, her body was discovered the next day in the trunk of her car, abandoned in a neighborhood miles away. She had been shot in the head, a cold and calculated execution.
Her attacker speeding away, driving her Lincoln SUV. Wilson was later found stuffed in the trunk of that SUV. She had been shot to death.
The case unraveled quickly as detectives traced Miller's movements. Using surveillance footage, witness accounts, and digital evidence, investigators built a damning case. Miller attempted to evade justice, but was arrested just days later. His criminal record, which included multiple offenses, painted a picture of a man with unchecked rage and a dangerous history.
She was simply trying to live her life, work hard, and break off a relationship that she knew was not good for her.
During his trial, prosecutors highlighted Miller's pattern of targeting women who rejected him. Testimony from family members, friends, and even strangers illustrated the fear and devastation he left in his wake. His chilling lack of remorse was on full display as the evidence mounted against him. Miller pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and kidnapping, facing a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was tense as Patrice's family confronted him, their voices trembling with grief and anger. Despite their emotional pleas, Miller remained cold, his expression devoid of remorse. His sentencing marked the end of a dark chapter for Detroit, but left unanswered questions about the justice system's ability to prevent such tragedies.
Livingston says she can't stomach the thought of losing another child.
Back in 2003, I lost a son. He was riding his bike and he was 15 years old and a car hit him.
Community members held vigils, mourning the loss of a vibrant woman whose life was cut short by senseless violence. In the courtroom, Patrice's mother delivered a powerful statement, recounting the devastating moment she learned of her daughter's death.
I can say to you, I don't understand you. What kind of person are you? Where you come from? Who can even support you?
His lack of reaction only deepened the outrage for those present. For Patrice's family, there was no closure, only the bittersweet knowledge that her killer would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Jameer Miller's lack of remorse highlighted the terrifying consequences of obsession turned deadly. But the next case centers on Harvey Nichols, a man whose fixation escalated into a brutal crime, leaving a community shaken.
I heard gunshots and just dived for cover. It was horrific.
It all happened so quickly, and the next thing I see is the gun.
On September 13, 2005, the glamorous Harvey Nichols department store became the site of a horrifying crime. Amid bustling shoppers, Michael Petch, a former security guard, approached Claire Bernal, a 22-year-old beauty consultant, with chilling intent. In a matter of seconds, the store transformed from a luxurious haven into a scene of chaos as Michael enacted his devastating plan.
Exclusive Harvey Nichols department store in London tonight. Police said a man and a woman were pronounced dead at the store.
Michael Petch had become obsessed with Claire after a brief relationship. When Claire ended things, his behavior spiraled. He began stalking her relentlessly, sending threatening messages and following her every move. Claire, terrified, reported him to the authorities. Michael was arrested and charged with harassment, but despite being bailed with strict conditions, he continued to track Claire. On the day of the murder, Michael slipped past Harvey Nichols' security. Armed with a 9mm handgun he had smuggled into the UK from Slovakia, he followed Claire into the beauty hall. Witnesses later recalled seeing him pacing near her counter, his face dark with anger. As Claire chatted with a colleague, Michael pulled out his gun and shot her in the back of the head. She collapsed instantly.
The thing we established was that 4 shots were fired, and then a further one was shot into the ceiling, and then he turned the gun on himself.
Shocker screamed and ducked for cover as Michael fired 3 more shots into Claire before turning the gun on himself. Witnesses described the horror of seeing Claire's lifeless body on the store floor, surrounded by broken glass and the lingering echo of gunshots.
Behind this shocking murder in the most prestigious shopping street in the UK lies a tale of love, obsession, and a very modern phenomenon, stalking.
Michael's obsession had robbed Claire of her future and left her loved one shattered. Despite Claire's reports to the authorities and Michael's bail conditions, he was able to acquire a firearm and evade detection. The failure to protect Claire from a known stalker sparked outrage across the UK, leading to calls for stricter stalking laws and better support for victims.
As they told me what had happened, I knew it was Pesh. I just knew. I said, it's Pesh.
Claire's mother, Patricia Bernal, became a vocal advocate for stalking victims, dedicating her life to raising awareness and pushing for legal reforms. She was so full of life, Patricia recalled, her voice breaking. No one should endure what Claire did.
I've learnt about another world that we live in, and I've been cocooned, and I've cocooned my children.
The public outcry following Claire's murder led to the establishment of organizations like Protection Against Stalking. While justice couldn't bring Claire back, her story became a catalyst for change, giving strength to countless stalking victims who feared they had no voice. Our next case takes stalking to a new level. Stephen Duxbury, a man whose actions turned a young woman's worst fears into a terrifying reality.
The suspicious death of a 27-year-old Orlando woman. Sasha Samsudin's body was found Saturday night inside of her apartment at Uptown Place.
In the early hours of October 17, 2015, Sasha Samsudin, a vibrant 27-year-old with a bright future, was found lifeless in her Orlando apartment. Sasha had been enjoying a night out with friends before the unimaginable happened. What started as an ordinary evening turned into a nightmare when Stephen Duxbury, a security guard at her apartment complex, used his position of trust to commit an act of unthinkable violence. Stephen Duxbury, a 33-year-old security guard at the apartment complex, exploited his position to target Sasha. When Sasha, slightly intoxicated, struggled to find her keys to enter her apartment, Duxbury offered to help. What seemed like an act of kindness quickly turned sinister. Surveillance footage captured Sasha entering the complex with Duxbury following closely behind, a chilling image that would later haunt investigators.
As a security guard, he used his access to prey on someone who was very vulnerable.
What happened next unfolded behind closed doors, but the evidence told a story of horror. Duxbury used his master key fob to access Sasha's apartment. There, he launched a brutal attack, strangling her in a desperate attempt to silence her screams. Sasha fought for her life, scratching Duxbury and leaving DNA evidence under her fingernails, a silent testimony to her struggle.
They started gathering evidence inside Sasha Samsudin's neat and tidy apartment after finding her lifeless body in her bed October 17th.
The morning after, Sasha's friends became worried when she didn't respond to calls or texts. Their fears turned into devastation when her lifeless body was discovered inside her apartment, wrapped in a blanket. Investigators quickly zeroed in on Duxbury after uncovering damning evidence: misuse of the key fob, inconsistencies in his alibi, and Sasha's DNA found on his person. The community, once trusting of their security staff, was left in shock and fear.
Death is the result of asphyxiation and a particular type of asphyxiation, manual strangulation.
The trial was harrowing. The prosecution meticulously laid out the evidence, painting a chilling picture of a man who betrayed his position of trust for his twisted desires. Sasha's family and friends filled the courtroom. Their grief was palpable as they relived the horrifying details of her final moments. Duxbury, who showed no remorse, claimed innocence and attempted to shift blame onto others. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for only 5 hours before finding him guilty of first-degree murder, attempted sexual battery, and burglary. He was sentenced to life without parole, ensuring he would never harm another innocent victim again. Sasha's mother stood before the court, her voice trembling but determined, as she described the void left in their lives. Friends recounted Sasha's warmth and ambition, contrasting the bright future she had with the darkness of her end. Duxbury's cold, detached demeanor during these testimonies added another layer of pain for those seeking closure. The case served as a chilling reminder of how predators can hide in plain sight, even under the disguise of protection. The haunting image of Sasha's final moments and her fight for survival left an indelible mark on the community and beyond. But if this betrayal of trust shocked you, the next case takes it even further. Martin Muniz, a man who preyed on those closest to him.
I'm serious, I'm not crazy. And you could go to the address and verify. The address is 3719 Mac Court. But I want you to handcuff me first.
It started as an ordinary January evening in 2023 on Cleveland's Mac Court, where a quiet neighborhood turned into a nightmare. 4 family members were brutally shot to death in their own home, and an 8-year-old girl was left critically injured but clinging to life. The attacker? A relative they once trusted, Martin Muniz. This massacre wasn't random. It was a calculated eruption of violence that shocked an entire community. Muniz's relationship with his family had always been strained. He often clashed with them over perceived slights and unresolved tensions. On January 13, 2023, Martin Muniz arrived at the family home with vengeance on his mind. Armed with a handgun, he first turned on his father, shooting him point blank. His sister, her boyfriend, and their mother were next. each gunned down in cold blood.
You name out the people again you said who he said he killed?
It's a sister. Her name is Angelique. The husband, Tone. 2 kids.
As chaos erupted, Muniz set his sights on the youngest member of the family, an 8-year-old girl. Though critically injured, she managed to survive the ordeal, becoming the key witness to this unfathomable tragedy. Muniz didn't flee immediately. Instead, he walked out of the home with a chilling calm, almost as if nothing had happened. Police apprehended Muniz later that evening, just blocks from the scene. During questioning, he displayed no remorse, instead blaming his actions on internal turmoil and long-standing family grievances. Investigators quickly pieced together the sequence of events using forensic evidence, witness statements, and the surviving girl's testimony.
Well, I tried to kill my sister's whole family, but 2 of them got lucky and lived.
Muniz's criminal record showed a dark history, including a connection to a 2013 cold case murder in New Jersey. This revelation painted a clearer picture of a man with a violent past, whose rage had now boiled over into a massacre. His own confession sealed his fate, as he admitted to pulling the trigger in a moment of uncontrollable anger. In the court, the details of the crime stunned even seasoned prosecutors. Muniz's defense attempted to argue diminished responsibility, claiming mental instability. But the jury was unswayed. The verdict? Guilty on all counts of murder, attempted murder, and multiple related charges. Muniz was sentenced to life in prison without parole, a punishment some family members felt was still too lenient for the horrors he inflicted.
The family has now come from all over the world to say goodbye and be here as 8-year-old Iana continues to fight.
Family members of the victims expressed their heartbreak and fury, with one relative calling Muniz a monster in disguise. The 8-year-old survivor, now in therapy, faces a lifetime of trauma, haunted by the memories of that night.
The suspect appeared to be almost grinning as the prosecutor mentioned his victims.
Muniz, meanwhile, sat stone-faced, his lack of remorse further fueling the anguish of those left behind. Outside the courtroom, neighbors and friends lit candles and held vigils for the slain family, grappling with the reality that such evil had lived among them. This case left an indelible scar in the community, a chilling reminder of how deep betrayal can cut. The next case takes stalking to an entirely different level. Joshua Stimson didn't just take a life. His calculated and obsessive behavior revealed a terrifying predator who stopped at nothing to control his victim.
Josh Stimson became increasingly threatening after Molly broke off their relationship and he turned up at her gym that day.
Molly McLaren was a bright, ambitious 23-year-old with her entire future ahead of her. She loved fitness, was pursuing a degree in health and nutrition, and lit up the lives of everyone around her. But beneath the surface of her happy life was a dark shadow. Joshua Stimson, a man who turned from a charming acquaintance into a relentless stalker. Their encounter on Tinder seemed harmless at first, but it would spiral into a nightmare that ended in unimaginable tragedy. Molly and Joshua began dating in November 2016, but the relationship quickly unraveled. Stimson displayed obsessive, controlling behavior, bombarding her with messages, monitoring her social media, and reacting with anger when things didn't go his way. Molly broke off the relationship in June 2017, but Stimson refused to accept her decision.
He turned very quickly into this very, very nasty, manipulative character. She was upset every day.
His stalking escalated rapidly. He began leaving cryptic posts on Facebook, referencing Molly by name and implying she was promiscuous. He also followed her to public places, including her gym, where CCTV later revealed him watching her every move. Despite Molly's attempts to cut ties and even reporting Stimson to the police, he continued to fixate on her, turning her life into a constant state of fear and anxiety.
When CCTV cameras captured Stimson following Molly up into a gym in the dockside area of Chatham, he was already guilty of stalking her.
On June 29, 2017, Molly decided to work out at the gym in Chatham, Kent, hoping to reclaim a sense of normalcy. Unbeknownst to her, Stimson was waiting for her in the parking lot, having meticulously planned his attack. CCTV captured his chilling behavior as he followed her inside, staying close but keeping his distance, a predator stalking its prey. When Molly left the gym and got into her car, Stimson struck. Armed with a knife he had bought just days earlier, he forced his way into her vehicle and began a vicious attack. Molly fought desperately to escape, but Stimson's rage was unrelenting. By the time emergency services arrived, Molly had succumbed to her injuries. She had been stabbed over 75 times. Stimson was arrested at the scene, bloodied and unrepentant. During his trial, the prosecution presented a mountain of evidence that demonstrated his calculated intent, from his stalking behaviors to the purchase of the murder weapon. Stimson's defense argued diminished responsibility, claiming mental instability, but the jury rejected this outright.
Stimson claimed he was suffering from a mental condition, but the jury said it was murder.
In February 2018, Joshua Stimson was found guilty of Molly's murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 26 years. The judge described his actions as a brutal and sustained attack, driven by a need for control and revenge.
To begin with, we were both really strong and there for each other, but now Doug seems to be on his own.
Molly's family and friends shared stories of a vibrant young woman stolen too soon, their grief palpable as they faced the man responsible.
One of the charities involved said it's a disaster waiting to happen.
But it's not waiting to happen, it has happened.
Stimson showed no remorse, his cold demeanor only deepening the pain for those mourning Molly's loss. These cases are a chilling reminder that justice is not always swift, but when it arrives, it can bring closure to victims' families and ensure that dangerous individuals never harm again. But there's more to uncover. In our next video on screen, we'll dive deeper into more haunting cases and sentences that expose the darkest depths of human nature.